We're in the middle of 2 weeks of affordable housing week, really organized and sponsored by Silicon Valley at Home, grown last year from 1 year to 2 years. We've had an event here last year, and this is a repeat. We have this magnificent room by the grace of Morrison and Forrester, by the prodding of A.C. Johnson. You want to raise your hand? We have 3 existing co-sponsors, 2 existing co-sponsors with us. We're Palo Alto Forward. I'm Steve Levy. For the 2nd year in a row, this is a Silicon Valley at Home week event. So David Meyer, raise your hand, and thanks to Silicon Valley at Home for all of your efforts. For the 2nd year in a row, I'm a member of all 4 organizations. The League of Women Voters of Palo Alto has co-sponsored our event. Would any of the league folks, I know there are 4 or 5, raise your hand. I don't see very well this year. For the first time, Spur has co-sponsored this, and I don't know whether Teresa's in the room yet. When she comes, we'll give her an acknowledgement. I'd like you all to help me and the panel. Raise your hand if you know of a family where the young adult is living at home to save money on housing costs. Okay. Raise your hand again if you know of someone or know someone who's commuting well over an hour a day each way so they can live in an area that they can afford. Do you know anyone, I do, who's been on a wait list for subsidized housing for 5 years, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years? Do you know anyone who's had their rent increased for 5 or 6 years in a row, well above their rated income? Do you know any folks who 10 years ago might have been living 1 or 2 together but are now living 4 or 5 as housemates in order to save rent? Okay. I do numbers as a living. That's the human face of what we're doing this week, what the panelists are going to talk about, why housing supply and affordability is so challenging. There are people who are struggling now who wouldn't have struggled 10 years ago. There are people who, at lower income levels, have struggled forever. This panel was put together because Palo Alto last year began, and we'll discuss how far we got, but began to take some positive steps to address all of the aspects of the housing challenges, from below market rate housing to market rate housing, and the deepest struggle of all, the missing middle, people who make too much to afford to be able to be eligible for subsidized housing, but don't make enough to pay the rent. This Nis is many things. She's a council member, she was mayor, she was a school board member, she was a supervisor, but for tonight, she's the co-author of the colleagues memo that got the housing work plan that we're going to talk about started in Palo Alto. That work was shepherded, I think is the right word, by Jonathan Lake, who became planning director from assistant planning director and is now trying to hire an assistant planning director and probably 4 or 5 other people. Yep. So we have the staff. He has 20 years in planning, but he will give us the details of what we did in the housing work plan and hopefully what we'll do next. As I said, there are a whole variety of housing challenges, but I think Affordable Housing Week, and we all know that folks at lower income are the most challenged. Randy Suda is president of Palo Alto Housing, our nonprofit developer, but really the nonprofit developer for other cities in the peninsula, was community development director in Mountain View, and in part because of our housing work plan as a 59 unit low income and for disabled folks apartment complex on El Camino that's moving through the approval process. There's another piece that we did last year, just a tiny beginning on the missing middle housing, combining that with market rate housing. Todd Speaker managed that project. We have a project at the VTA site, El Camino and Page Mill, very close to here, that he'll talk about. But more than that, you're a developer of apartments. I think you have one in either Belmont or San Carlos. I forget which. And he'll talk about, I hope, the challenges for market rate housing and how you get units that are affordable to the missing middle. I'm going to disappear now and turn it over to Elaine Wong, who's an architect and planner by day, a full-time mother of two adorable young people that you can see on, young girls that you can see on Facebook. And in her spare time, that is a joke, right? Spare time.
My mother in my spare time, yeah.
She organizes events like this and serves as the president of the board at Palo Alto for her. Take it away.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to use this mic for a second. I also just want to acknowledge one other special guest who just walked in through the door, and Teresa Alvarado from Spur. Thank you so much for sponsoring this event and helping us get this off the ground. So it's very heartening to see a room like this. Thank you for your interest in what Palo Alto is doing to solve the housing crisis. I think we are all familiar with the symptoms that we see, the challenges that people are facing every day. I won't go into them. I think we all have our own stories, but I wanted to just kind of share my own kind of personal take on this. I do design buildings. That doesn't make me cruel and heartless. I really just have come to this because I realized how difficult it is for people who want to create housing to make that happen. I've had to turn a lot of clients away because what they want to do it's not possible. So last year when Steve generously asked me to join the Missing Middle Housing Panel, I jumped at it. I've since shifted a little bit, but I'm still very passionate about how we can provide housing for as many people as possible, because I'm tired of seeing everybody leave. I'm tired of seeing my friends, my friends leave. I'm tired of seeing my kids' friends leave. I'm tired of seeing people who have lived here for 20, 30, 40 years have to leave the community because they've been priced out, or their landlord raised the rent and kicked them out, or whatever. It is a problem of epic proportions. We all have to do our share, and I'm really, really, really thankful for all four of you for joining us today to share what it is that Palo Alto has been doing to pull in this effort. So we will hear from these four speakers. We'll start with Liz Niss. And maybe tell us a little bit about, why you decided to co-author that colleagues memo that led to the housing work plan, and tell us about some of the things that you've been hearing in the community.
Could I have a handheld mic?
You've got a mic right in front of you. Just push the button.
I want to stand up.
Oh, you want to stand up? Oh, I'm sorry.
I cannot give a speech sitting down, no matter what. So, before I go into the whys of why we did this, is this on? I hope.
Yes.
You're way at the back of the room?
Yeah.
So, how many of you don't think we need any more housing in Palo Alto? Anybody who just thinks we don't need any more anyhow? So, do you think we could use 10% more, 20% more, 30% more? Does it make you uneasy when you think about it? There's only one time when we increased our housing stock rather dramatically, and that was between pretty much 2000 and 2012. That's when the Hyatt went in, that's when the JCC put their housing in as well. A lot of growth in that period. And our population went from about 55,000 to 65,000. So that was a huge jump and a big change. I don't know what council members might have been on then. Larry, were you on then? I'm trying to remember who might have been on at that time and can remember that and can remember that incredible change. So I will get to the housing work plan in a minute. But this week was one of those times, and you'll have to give me a high side one because this is so much fun. So this week, thank you to the Post. Anybody from the Post here tonight covering this? The Post gave all the headlines that I needed to come tonight. This was the first one. This is from last Thursday. City approves large number of new homes. When it comes to housing, who outpaces Palo Alto? Guys, you know who does. Who? Mountain View, of course. So Mountain View City Council approved more apartments in 2 hours last night than Palo Alto City Council has permitted in the last 5 years. That doesn't make you feel good. On Tuesday night, they approved 541 apartments. It was a 471 unit apartment complex on Evelyn and a 71 unit affordable apartment development at 950 West El Camino. So, and I know that Randy may talk a little about Mountain View tonight, which is where he lives and also where he's been working. So I think we're being outpaced by Mountain View. And then, how many of you happened to be at our Monday night council meeting this week? Was it an interesting meeting? Probably one of the more interesting I've ever gone to. It says housing bill divides 3 cities. Never has it been more apparent how divided we all are than if you had sat there that night. And if you had listened to either Larry Moody or Ruben Abrica or whomever who spoke about how they feel they have been providing housing for those of us who are across the road from them. Larry gave a particularly moving speech, and at the end of it he said, this is about being humanitarian. He has a background in the ministry, and he's a very effective speaker. So, as it said, at Palo Alto City Hall last night, which was Monday, council members did something unthinkable for many Palo Altans. They voiced support for Senate Bill 50. SB 50, I know, will come up tonight. That's sort of on everybody's mind. So the last one, I sort of hate being out Mountain View. Do you know that? It's kind of hard. The last one says city finds a lot for car campers. So what Mountain View has been doing is trying to find extra space somewhere for campers, and they have done that. This is this morning's paper, it's probably still around somewhere. But they have had a way, they think, to get RVs off the streets. I think there are lots of problems that will still exist with the RVs, but at the same time, I know that in Palo Alto, we need to take this up again. And Karen, you might remember, we took it up once before. Do you remember that? And then there was a Supreme Court decision regarding people sleeping in their cars. And you might remember that, that's from 2014. So to go back and just talk a little bit about why we did a housing work plan, and you're going to hear a whole lot more from Jonathan tonight. But we needed a housing work plan because after we finished the comprehensive plan and looked at the amount of housing that was suggested, that was suggested that we are going to do 300 houses a year in Palo Alto. Actually it says 230 to 290. But can any of you imagine adding 300 houses per year in Palo Alto? And I know that there are at least 3 or 4 of us here tonight who probably voted for that. It's a lot of housing, but it also is the amount of housing we actually need. So as you look at this, what will jump out at you is what we've been discussing for the last several years, which is zoning. Are we willing to change our zoning a little bit? Are we willing to go up a little higher? are we willing to maybe develop more in the downtown area, more on University Avenue? Could we do more mixed-use housing in particular? So it addresses that. And we're beginning to see just the beginnings of people looking at the housing plan and starting to make some tentative sort of putting their foot in the shallow water, and some of them talking to Jonathan about it. And he told me there is one today already from somebody having read the new plan and realizing how they could use it. So we'll go into that more later. But housing is such a challenge in Palo Alto. So few people are able to just snap up a $2.5 million condo or buy what is a modestly priced $4 or $5 million home, never mind a $10 million home. But one of the ways that we know that really has happened is our property tax revenue is up again this year. And whenever that goes up, that means that a lot of dwellings of some type have been sold. And we are fortunate that the money comes back into Palo Alto, to the city council, but especially to the school board. You know that for the school board, property tax is without that, they would not have a healthy budget.
Liz, you've got 1 minute.
Okay, and so then, one of the questions was, why did we co-author the work plan? And I think I've said that. Lee asked all the good questions tonight, which is, do you know anybody who needs some housing? Do you know anyone who is not in a housing condition they would like to be in? And that's why we wrote it. We said that there must be ways that we can do this that are more flexible, that still will not cause discomfort in the community, and that's really important, and where we can get a little more flexible in our zoning, always a challenge. So thank you so much. It's so great to see all of you here tonight, and I think I know most of you, so that makes it even more enjoyable. So I'm going to turn it back to Randy, or to
Turn it back to me.
Okay. And I do think you'll hear from Randy next. Thank you.
Liz. Just to set the format and the framework, thank you, Liz. That was a great introduction to the next 3 speakers. We will hear from Jonathan Late first, followed by Todd Speaker of Windyville Property Ventures, and then our last batter up will be Randy Sealer from Palo Alto Housing. So that's the order we'll go in. We'll offer a couple of initial questions, and then we'll open it up to Q&A, at which point we'll have a microphone rotating. And so before we do the Q&A, I'll set a couple of just some ground rules. But first, we'd like to hear from Jonathan Lee.
So, thank you, Elaine. And so that's getting set for us. I'm Jonathan Late. I'm the director for the planning department. I think it's maybe worth noting that I have a little bit of a different role than some of the other folks on the panel. I'm not a developer. I'm not a politician. I'm a bureaucrat, and so I work in a capacity to advance the goals and the policies of our city council. And in this capacity, I work for the city manager, and so while I certainly may have some personal opinions and ideas about things in my role and in my capacity here, I may be a little more tempered in my enthusiasm, only because I want to maintain, my sort of objectiveness throughout this. So, anyways, I'll go ahead and begin. And you had a little bit of a back. That's fine. That's good. You had a nice sort of framing from Steve and from Liz Niss. Here's a few more numbers to just sort of acquaint ourselves with Palo Alto. Palo Alto is pretty much a built-out community. Population about 67,000. 69% of the parcels zoned in Palo Alto are zoned for R1 housing. And the-
Yeah.
well, no, so I'm saying 69%, but the 72% is the R1 zoning plus the sort of low-density zoning that we also have. So it's combining low-density and single-family. I was just making a distinction between single-family and some of those other parcels that we have zoned. Ownership is almost split, 45-55. We have about 2,200 units that are deed restricted to low-income housing. And if you don't know, it's kind of an expensive place to live. This is a graph that shows the job production over since 2010 compared to our housing production. The green line is the housing production. The orange line is the number of jobs that we've produced. And if you were to look back in the last 10 years, it's roughly about 20,000 new jobs that have been created. Less than, I think, 700 housing units that have been created in that same time frame. In this graph here, it's about 612 units. We have, the state requires that it assigns each local jurisdiction a what's called a regional housing need assessment. It's a number that we try to target and plan for in terms of producing housing units at various income levels. And this graph shows the present RHNA cycle that we are in on the far right. The middle one was the most recent cycle that we've completed, and the one before that is, well, the one before that. And on that one, we did pretty well. We exceeded the total number of units that was expected to be produced in terms of RHNA. But since then, our trend has not been as strong, or at least not sustaining that same level of output. And like many of the other jurisdictions, not just in the Bay Area, but in California, it's really hard to meet those lower income household numbers, which you have folks, Randy here can sort of speak in more detail to you. So this isn't lost, I don't think, on the City Council, the public. There's certainly been an interest in wanting to advance new housing policy opportunities. Liz spoke a moment ago about the colleagues memo that she helped author. And that colleagues memo, combined with the comprehensive plan that was adopted in November 2017, really set forth the framework for what would become the housing work program that we're talking about this evening. And Liz already noted the number of units that were anticipated to be produced with that comp plan. But again, it was adopted in 2017, and it started in 2015, so we were already 2 years behind the schedule as far as that goes. So when we first launched, when we just got that approved, we were suddenly at 300 units on average that we needed to produce a year from that point. The housing work plan is divided into 5 different sections. There was a number of initiatives that the council had already directed to be started that we were working on, and so of course the task there was to continue and to complete that. There was a list of amendments that were desired for 2018, for 2019, and then how do we take advantage of the housing funds that we have available and the partnerships to support and facilitate more housing opportunities. So digging a little bit deeper into the work plan, one of our ongoing initiatives that the city was actually working on before the state had advanced its bill that is now law. The city had directed staff to do some work on that, and we did. And through that process, we had to update our standards to reflect what the state was doing. And in the end, there was a couple of key areas that were really limiting ADU production in Palo Alto. One was the biggest one, I think, was the minimum lot size requirement to place an ADU on private property. And the second restriction that was difficult for folks was parking. Finding a place to put parking that was not in setbacks and on the property. So the council took the initiative to eliminate those constraints, and among several others, and in some ways went beyond the state And we've had some pretty good success in our ADU production. Thank you. And we continue to refine the ADU process along the way. And even more recently, we've just made changes to waivers, the development impact fees. So we now have some waivers that would make that a little bit more interesting. This chart's a little bit nerdy, and I hope it's, apologize for it being too busy, but it's fascinating, and I think it sort of reflects the trend of ADU production. But subtly in that diagram, this reveals another problem that I need to work on, is that we're accepting more applications than we're able to push out. And so you see those straight lines, the orange one on top of the, I don't know if that's blue or green, below that, this distance that's created between application coming in and the permit being issued. And so we're aware of that, and we've identified that for the council, and we're studying to see what we can do to turn out these ADU applications more quickly. Some of the other initiatives was the affordable housing overlay. You've heard that mentioned a couple of times. Randy will speak more about the project that's pictured here. But basically, the City Council adopted an ordinance that would allow for 2.0 FAR up to 50 feet in height, modified a number of development standards, including reduced parking, so that it was 0.75 parking spaces per unit. And you need to be located within a transit area or near fixed rail. The other initiative that Todd will speak to is this project, and this was the workforce housing ordinance overlay. And this one also established similar development standards, but it had the added provision of having deed restricted, 20% of the units need to be deed restricted for what we call workforce housing, and we sort of define that as 140 and 150% of the area median income, which I think today in Santa Clara for family four is what, 125,000. So you had to be at 140 of that, but you're not getting 4 people in those units. So, right. Okay. Both of these are overlays, and therefore require legislative action by the City Council. And so that creates a little bit of a, less predictability for a developer when going through that process. I'll talk about that as we go further. The bigger changes that we made occurred in 2018, and this is where we spent a lot of time working with the Planning Commission. We held some stakeholder meetings and spoke a lot with the community in I would say, a really good process to address what we understood to be some of the constraints toward housing production. And this ordinance identifies that we made some citywide changes. We eliminated or reduced the parking requirements for multifamily housing by 10%. We streamlined our application review process so that you didn't have to go to the Planning Commission, Architecture Review Board, and City Council to get an approval for a project. Now you just need to go to the Architecture Review Board and get design review. It's still subject to appeal to the City Council. We've exempted, with some exceptions, affordable housing projects from the retail preservation ordinance, and we've allowed for rooftop gardens. The other changes to the multifamily zone is we up-zoned RM15 to RM20, which is units per acre. We established a minimum density requirement, and we allowed properties that are over FAR or over unit density to be rebuilt at that same density. For portions along El Camino Real, downtown, and on California Avenue area, we made some more significant changes. We eliminated a unit density cap that existed in the code. We allow for exclusively residential projects. Before you had to have commercial in order to get residential. Now you can do straight residential unless there's already a retail requirement on the ground floor, as we have on University Avenue and California Avenue. The legislative requirements for the affordable overlay were removed with this ordinance. So as we mentioned a moment ago, there's this legislative process that you had to go through to get Wilton Court approved. Now that can be approved just through the ARB process at the same heights and densities that were previously allowed. And importantly, we established the Housing Incentive Program. And this was a response to balance the community's concerns regarding wanting to be engaged in the process and have public participation. But SB 35 created a process where qualifying projects can have streamlined review. So we wanted to create an incentive to allow projects to get more FAR, greater density, but also go through our review process. And so that's what was established in those areas. Can I just quickly wrap up with, okay, I'll zip through the rest of these. So for 2019, we're looking at inclusionary housing and modifying those standards. We're doing a study and we'll come back with some recommendations to council, we hope this year, to address those standards. You can see on the slide, there's a few other areas that we're working on. Our work production is going to be a little bit lower this year than it was last year. As far as funds, we've had about 13 million in funds. Now this slide actually doesn't include the 14.5 million that was offered in that partnership to save Buena Vista. But we also have 3 million that we've earmarked for a teacher housing project and then also for Randy's project. So this is my ending slide. Where do we go from here? We've got some exciting stuff happening. We got a project that's going to be presented to the City Council on May 20th for a study session review. I'm happy to talk more about that. And we got some other opportunities for to make housing more, to create housing opportunities, we'll say, in the future. So I'll end there.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was a great overview for the last 3-4 years of work. So I'm going to turn this over to Todd just to talk a little bit about what's going on with him. Can you see this, Todd?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, you're good. Okay.
Thank you, Todd Speaker, Windy Hill. We're a local Palo Alto-based real estate company. We do projects here locally, primarily in San Mateo, Santa Clara County. These are kind of our current projects that we're working on that are in current stages of either development or entitlement. We do office, we do retail, we do multifamily. We have a project going for a city council in Belmont on Tuesday, 250 units, 15% affordable at the low level. And we have endorsements by the Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County, Green Trip, Greenbelt Alliance, and Bay Area Housing Advocacy Coalition. So that's my plug. If anybody knows anybody in Belmont that wants to support this, we can use the help. So this is the project that Jonathan was talking about that we got approved last year. And there was many challenges, but there was also opportunity here. Our first meeting with staff was in early 2016, and we got city council approval in June of 2018. So we hope to start construction in the next 30 days. And then if you take 2 years for construction and stabilization, we're kind of 5+ years from start to finish on these things. So from a timing perspective, just to kind of give you an idea of what it takes to actually get these things going. And Randy, I'm sure, can sympathize with that as well. The obvious opportunities on this project was the Stanford Research Park, 26,000+ jobs across the street, Caltrain, California Avenue, all the transportation along El Camino, like those were the opportunities. But the real challenge was also kind of the real opportunity here, which was the zoning. So the zoning is PF. It was the former VTA lot, and it was zoned public facility. And I think if this was zoned kind of RN15, RN30, RN40, it would have made it much more challenging because we were able to kind of start with like a blank slate, which I think was important. So we kind of had to follow certain guidelines, kind of 2.0 FAR, the 50-foot height limit. But other than that, we can kind of plan whatever we wanted to do. And I think that was kind of important, where if we were in the RN30, we wouldn't have been able to do that. So I feel like that was a big opportunity, but it also presented a lot of challenges. 2 main challenges were, I would say, parking was one, because anybody you talked to on this project had an opinion on parking. It was either way too much or not enough, or anywhere in between. And so that was kind of difficult to work through. I think we ended up parking it, too much, but kind of we'll see. The other challenge was the affordable. And this being like Affordable Housing Week, this is, I may be taboo to say this, but if we were required to provide affordable housing on site kind of below 120% of AMI, we would not be talking about this project right now. We simply could not have done it. And this is where we give Jonathan a lot of credit, because we spent a lot of time talking about this and kind of negotiating this. And it was a creativity between us and staff that kind of came up with this 140 to 150% of AMI, which has been the signal. And that was very, very critical in getting this through. But I will tell you that the on-site affordable requirements for this site would have made it, it would have killed the deal. And our project in Belmont, we had no problem putting 15% of low at that site. It worked, it was a bigger project, it was able to pencil. This one was not. So,
Killed the deal financially, not public community engagement wise, or both.
well, I mean, obviously,
Financially.
yeah, it was financial. It wouldn't have worked from an economic standpoint. So I'm happy to answer more questions about this project too. So I'd like to talk about these two buildings here. So I don't want to take anything away from what Jonathan and Liz and the council and Corey and Adrian and Liz with the college memo, because I think what they did was amazing, and I think it was very challenging to get that through, and I understand that. But I'm going to talk about a couple of things where, like when I see these two buildings up here, I look at them and say, okay, these buildings are perfect for retail on the ground floor and housing above them. Both of these buildings are buildings that have been presented to us as that have purchased them, and they're along University Avenue. And I think they're great examples of kind of a President's Hotels, a type of project in downtown where you can provide 2, 3, 4 levels of housing above these retail restaurants. But unfortunately, I don't think the housing work plan went far enough. I love that they took away the density per acre kind of restriction. I think that was huge. I think lowering the parking requirements was also huge. But you can't, on these two sites right here, you cannot provide parking. It's impossible. There's nowhere to provide curb cuts. These buildings are surrounded on 3 other sides, and it just does not work. But you saw the city of Palo Alto kind of come together. It was a very unifying event watching what happened with the President's Hotel. And you kind of had everybody on both sides kind of, let's save these residents. Let's not kick them out. Let's keep that. And so why not provide more of those type of buildings downtown? And that's what I'd like to see. So, one other thing to kind of talk about where I don't know if it's okay to talk about Palo Alto now is the PC zoning. And like for residential, not for office, but for residential. And I don't know this, but I would assume that the majority of multifamily housing projects built in the last 30 years use the PC zoning. The zoning, the RM30, RM40 levels can be just a little bit restrictive, and it's not going to go all the way. I mean, both our project on Page Mill and El Camino, both projects, the Sunrise Living Facility and the condo project behind it, both were approved using the PC. And so I personally would like to see that come back. I think that would really increase the housing applications in Palo Alto. Sorry if I offended anybody. No, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Todd, for your point of view. I know that there's going to be a lot of questions, and I promise we will get to them, but I'd like to give Randy Suda a chance to present his point of view. And then we'll take on a couple of kickoff questions after that. So, Randy?
Well, thank you, and thank you, Palo Alto Ford, for inviting me to speak to you tonight. My name is Randy Suda, and I am the CEO of Palo Alto Housing, and as various folks have referenced, I was previously the Community Development Director in Mountain View for over 10 years, so you may see me shift hats at various points in this presentation. I'm still a little schizophrenic on this point sometimes. And Jonathan, when I was director, one of the things that really irritated me is when developers got up and mischaracterized what the zoning code was. So I'm giving you full permission to do the same thing to me when I screw up on my quotations of the Palo Alto code. So just a quick introduction to Palo Alto Housing. We are an independent nonprofit affordable housing developer. We have been in existence here in Palo Alto for close to 50 years. I think next year will be our 50th anniversary. So we have been part of this community for a long, long time. And what we do is we build affordable housing, we manage those properties for our portfolio and also on behalf of some other third-party property owners. We provide resident services tailored to the population of our residents, whether they are folks transitioning out of homelessness, whether it's a family project, you name it. And then lastly, we also provide some outsourced services for cities, for jurisdictions, including the city of Palo Alto. So here's a quick snapshot on our properties. We currently have 24 properties in our portfolio. We house about 2,500 residents in Palo Alto currently, and we have 6 projects in the pipeline. 4 in Mountain View, 1 here in Palo Alto that I'll spend some time talking about, and 1 we had a groundbreaking in the North Fair Oaks neighborhood in San Mateo County not more than about a month ago. So we're excited to be expanding into San Mateo County also. I just wanted to introduce you, for those of you who don't know some of our projects, just want to give you a quick snapshot. This is the Treehouse project in South Palo Alto on the Rashford Barrow. Project that we are particularly proud of, and the last project that we built in Palo Alto prior to Wilton Court. Oak Court is one I will also reference. This is right just south of downtown. It's part of the south of Forest Avenue neighborhood plan. Is on a portion of the property in that area that used to be the Palo Alto Medical Foundation. This is the project we just broke ground on, 2821 El Camino. This is the North Fair Oaks property. This will be a 4-story project, portion of the site, portion of the project dedicated to housing veterans. 950 El Camino, we were fortunate and thrilled to get approval from the Mountain View Council last Tuesday night. It was one of the projects that Liz referenced in that headline. It's a 67-unit project in which about 20% of the units will be reserved for adults with developmental disabilities. And then let's transition to Wilton Court. And we'll use Wilton Court as a case study of what can happen when a community, any community, takes a look at its zoning code and adds some flexibility, adds accommodations that accommodate the needs of today's affordable housing developers. And it shows you how changes to the code actually can produce affordable housing projects. So Wilton Court on El Camino, it's on the 522 and 22 bus lines. We have bus stops very close to the project, so we're well served by VTA service, which is critical in that the population for this project is also, a portion of that is dedicated to adults with developmental disabilities. This is a 59-unit project, 100% affordable. You can see the income ranges there. 21 units for adults with developmental disabilities. A small site, less than half an acre, showing that what is possible for affordable housing projects. You can begin to take opportunity sites like this that are sites that most market rate developers would not necessarily target, and can produce a meaningful affordable housing project on it. quickly go through these massing studies, but this shows you the building envelope under the zoning code. And there we go. And what we did was, in large part in response to input from the community and PH trying to be a responsible neighbor, what we tried to do is break down the massing on the back side of the project that abuts the Ventura neighborhood. We carved out an area in the back that is a patio or a plaza that is open space for our residents. Stepped down the back of the building is a way to further mitigate the sense of height and bulk when viewed from the Ventura neighborhood. And it resulted in this site plan. So you can see in that right-hand corner the large outdoor plaza area, and faded out or shaded out in that very upper right corner is another open space area. There's an incredible existing tree in that area that will be preserved. So this is the resulting project. We have parking on a portion of the first level and then below grade, and we have the community spaces, bike parking, and other property management spaces located on the first floor. It's what the project looks like from El Camino and a close-up rendering of the entry of the project. So the affordable housing overlay, this project would not have occurred without the city's adoption of the affordable housing overlay, in large part due to, it really started with the colleagues memo that Liz helped draft, and with Jonathan's leadership, resulted in meaningful changes that helped accommodate and get this project, to make this project feasible. I won't go through each one of those numbers, you can see them, but it gave us the flexibility in terms of height, in terms of the floor area ratio to accommodate the project, flexibility on open space, and as Jonathan previously noted, a major shift in what the parking ratios are for a project like this. You know, those are ratios that were also backed up by not only parking studies that we did for the benefit of our own, making sure that we could accommodate our residents, but we also have similar studies that we've had to produce for our projects in other communities, all of which show that a 0.75 space per unit parking ratio is more than adequate, and in fact maybe more than is absolutely necessary. But as part of the conversations that we're having with the neighborhood, and to give comfort that there would not be spillover parking, we stuck with that ratio, and we also incorporated the adults with developmental disability units, and that reservation, and that population do not have cars. They don't drive, and they rely on public transportation. So it reduces parking demand, it reduces traffic demand, and provides a much needed type of housing, much needed for both Palo Alto community and in many other communities in Silicon Valley. Quick snapshot on what it takes to build an affordable housing project. It is not cheap. We are beset by the same challenges that a market rate developer is challenged by. Land is land, lumber is lumber, concrete is concrete, and those costs continue to rise. There's continue to be labor shortages or a rise in the cost of contractors, and in particular subcontractors. This is a snapshot of seven most recent affordable housing projects that Mountain View has approved. And these are 7 projects by 4 different affordable housing developers. So these are not just our projects, but 4 of the largest affordable housing providers in the Bay Area. Pay particular attention to the amount of local subsidy. While we will fully leverage local subsidies and state and federal sources, many of those sources are contingent or rely upon a local funding dedication or a local funding allocation. It does not happen without local funding. And we are fortunate that the Palo Alto City Council has pledged $10 million to invest in our project. Similarly, you will see in almost every other community that is doing affordable housing a similar type of investment by the local jurisdiction. I won't cover that. One last plug. You know, and Jonathan made the point that the cities are having struggles meeting the housing demands and the RENA allocations, things like that. The city's working on, Jonathan's staff is working very hard on the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan. There's been some discussion about affordable housing site, affordable housing policies in that plan. I would strongly encourage the city, the staff, the community to support inclusion of a meaningful affordable housing requirement in this plan, similar to what was done for the SOFA plans. That is my last plug, and I will turn it back to Elaine.
Thank you, Randy, and thank you, everyone. I think that was a really great overview of what's been going on the housing front here in Palo Alto, just a range of the different tools. And that kind of launches me into my first series of questions. They're related. I guess what I would love to hear from all four of you is, now that we've launched these ordinances and new regulatory frameworks into play, how should we measure the success and the effectiveness of these efforts? What are the metrics that we should be monitoring over the next however many, or even what's the time frame that we should be considering in order to evaluating whether we've succeeded or not? Yeah, let's just go down the line. Jonathan, what do you think?
So I think the short answer is how many units get produced compared to what we've produced in the past. And I guess by one measure, we can make, we can have a lot of success if we just get a couple of projects moving forward and heading in the right direction. And but I also think that, and we knew this when we went forward with this process, that none of these initiatives on their own are going to help the city get to the 300 or 200 and some odd units per year. We're going to continue to have to work at this and continue to refine the ordinances to get where they need to go. And I'll save more of my response for later if it comes up. I mean, there's other things that we still need to do. And we're aware of some of those things now, but I'll leave it at that for now.
I think it's pretty simple. Because you're going to get to 300 units per year. If it does, then it's successful. If it doesn't, then it needs to be tweaked to make sure it does.
Yeah, I would agree with the previous two. Does the city get to its established housing goals, and how much housing is produced over that time frame?
Are we going to end this, Liz?
Now that I've got two of these in front of me.
I think it's as simple as that. Do we actually do the 300 a year, which we have promised? That would certainly be success. But I think there's something else in the wind as well, because we have both SB 35 and SB 50, and they're not going to go away. And at some point, especially in Jonathan, you might have gone into some detail on this, if we don't make our RENA numbers, and don't ask me what RENA means other than it's the requirement we have every year.
Regional Housing Needs Allocation.
Thank you. Then there would be a penalty from the state. And if that happens, then that's going to make it very difficult. So we will be driven, I think, from both sides, both from the desire of the community and the want to do the comp plan, and from the other side, which is going to be eventually the state. Regardless of our fight against it, the state law will prevail eventually.
So just to follow up on that, what else should we do then, Liz? And maybe we'll just work back down this way. What are the next, in order to prevent that or to head that off, what do we need to do next?
Well, I think the next thing we need to do is publicize just what Wendy Hill is going to take up. as Todd said, if he'd known a little more before, he might have stretched a little further. So, but because he didn't at the time, he's going to go ahead with his project as it is. But I think we'll know, and I know PC is a dreaded word, but maybe we could use development agreement in its stead. But at some point, just as was mentioned, we need to go up. And one of the ways to go up is to have retail underneath and to have those above it. It's a little like Paris, right?
The question is, where do you go? Where do we go from here?
Sure. What would you like to see next? If there was, to rephrase it, if there was a housing work plan version 2.0, what would be included in that?
Well, I think from a broader perspective, I think one is it's important to monitor the success of the overlays and code changes that have been made, to find out in conversations with applicants like Wendy Hill what is working and what potentially may need to be tweaked. Because I think when you do a significant code change like that, there will inevitably need to be adjustments to fine tune those regulations. I think secondly, it is, there is no one silver bullet to provide housing opportunities and address the housing crisis. So I think there's a lot of individual actions that need to occur over an extended period of time. Everything from ADUs to increasing densities or area in key locations. I think it's looking at key opportunity areas like the Ventura area, and I think it's also continuing to look for opportunity sites that are currently developed but could be repositioned. Sites that are either industrial or office right now and could be made to have a more flexible zoning or general plan designation such that over time they could become future housing sites.
Todd, what do you think?
So there's obviously, minor tweaks with, parking, height, FAR, and density that you can change, but kind of overall, I think that Palo Alto in all the cities along the peninsula want to kind of maintain their control and not cede that control to the state. They need to get the housing built. And to do that, I think you should be encouraging more people to come into the city and making it, and saying, okay, we want it downtown, we want it along El Camino, we want it in the California Avenue, otherwise the state's going to come and people like me are going to be able to go anywhere we want the city and just build it. And so if you want to maintain that control, let's all work together and get it done in the areas that we all want to see it get done in, that make the most sense. So I guess that's what I got on that.
Just to kind of follow up, that said, what are the things on those corridors that you think need to change?
I think parking is a big one, especially downtown. I think height, I mentioned it earlier that on-site affordable would not work on our project. If we were allowed to go to 3.0 FAR or 4.0 FAR or 60 feet of height, then it would have worked. In Belmont, we are at 2.5 FAR, and that increase in density, that increase in FAR allows you to put the affordable, but when you make the restrictions so tight, it makes the affordable have that greater of an impact.
And Jonathan?
So whatever the council directs me to do, I'm happy. I could amplify that a little bit and just say, I do think that Randy and Todd hit some key points there. I think the community, the state's being, I'd say fairly aggressive in this issue of housing. And there is a need for a community dialogue about where we want to place more housing at greater density if, in fact, we do want to find ways to retain local control over housing production. And that starts with a conversation with the residents and the boards and commissions and councils. So I think that's going to be key to future regulations. I do think there's room in the community for that dialogue. Parking is a big issue, and I don't know how we're going to solve that, because there's folks who say, and Todd mentioned this before, there's folks that want less parking, and folks that think the parking's just right, and folks that want more parking. And so that's a challenge. I'll leave it. Oh, wait, no one more thing I'll say. The other, I think, two key pieces. We got to find out what works with what we've already adopted. It's been May 2nd since these ordinances just came into play. So the ones that I spoke to, it's going to take some time for this to play out. One of the other key factors is, I think from what I'm hearing from the community, is that we really need to also leverage our on-site affordability requirements. And so right now we're at 15%, and we're studying whether or not that needs to increase. I think for more housing to be produced, there's an expectation that more affordable housing units are also going to be provided on site. And so we need to find that, strike that balance somehow, and find out where we can get more of that in these market rate developments.
Great, thank you. And then some of you alluded to the economic climate in your presentations, but I wanted to just launch another question about the construction costs and the real estate prices being so high. What, if anything, in the housing work plan that kind of addresses the current economic climate? And if there needs to be more, what could really sort of, what do we need to do then if it doesn't do anything? What do we need to do in order to make more housing possible under this climate?
Are you talking about, when you mention that, Elaine, are you really saying, is there something we can change within the zoning or within the parking requirements and so forth that would lower the price of the
Well, I'm more wondering
dwelling of whatever kind?
Well, maybe I'll back up. Was the economic climate considered in the housing work plan? And maybe we'll start there.
Well, I'll just be real brief on that. So I'd like to say yes, and the way that we were, so I'm not a developer, I'm not an expert on these things, but we hired consultants, and we also met with people who are in the business of building housing. And so in that context, trying to understand what developers like Todd are experiencing was part of our process. And we did talk to Todd, and we actually talked to about 3 or 4 other developers who do work in the peninsula to sort of make sure that Todd wasn't telling us something that he just wanted us to hear because it's going to help his project. We tried to leverage that with folks who had, not that we didn't have any trust, but we wanted to be able to report that this is consistent, we're hearing the same information. And so that's to the extent that we were able to get that information and embed it in our tweaks with the development standards, we considered it that extent.
To parrot something that Randy said earlier, it costs what it costs, which sounds a little stupid, but you're right. Whether you're buying cement or doors or whether you're buying whatever other building materials you need, it's no less expensive when you're doing affordable housing. And I was pretty stunned when I realized that Wilton Court is actually going to cost $800,000 a unit. That's pretty stunning. And so in that case, I don't think of affordable housing any longer as affordable. I think of it as subsidized. I don't think there's any other way you can get affordable housing unless it's been subsidized. So, and frequently when we're dealing with the builder, we're saying to the builder, you must subsidize some affordable housing. It might be 10%, 15%, 20%, but it will be some percent. And then also, we haven't talked about density bonuses tonight, but the place that is going up now on Page Mill has a density bonus with it. So there are a number of ways to come at this, but one way or another, either we, in elected office with some money that happens to come into our funds, or if it's the developer, in that case Todd, that whatever you get will be subsidized by somebody. And I don't see any other way that we can do so-called affordable housing.
Go ahead, Tom.
So I think markets are cyclical, and I don't really think the cities should be kind of reactionary on this. I think it should be more it should be more proactive. I think, I mean, Jonathan mentioned, I think it was what, 2015 or 16 when you started the housing work plan, or the change in zoning, or how long did it take? About a year?
Yeah.
Okay, so it takes about a year, but these markets change. Like right now, you're in a period of time which we struggle with is in the last kind of 18 months, office rents have gone up kind of 20 to 25% in some of these downtown locations where residential rents are flat. And construction costs have gone up in some cases 1% a month over the last couple of years. And if you're building office, you get bailed out by the increase in rents, but the multifamily, the rents are flat. But it's not going to stay that way. It's going to change, and they're going to go down. Sometimes the apartment rents will go up, and the office will be a little bit more flat. But right now, we're in a period of you can make an office development pencil easier than you can make an apartment project pencil. So, kind of for the city, encourage, what can you do to allow for greater things so that you can prevent yourself from being susceptible to the market or with your zoning.
I would just urge us to think about, think about funding for affordable housing in the context of the economy. There's a lot of funding sources that many cities have that are really directly tied to development activity right now. The more office development you have, obviously, the more impact fees that are paid in. That this economy too shall end one day. I don't know when, but it's one of these it's either the longest or second longest economic expansion in U.S. history. And this too will come to an end one of these days. One of the things that I do urge local governments to start thinking about is that I think we need to look hard at how do we fund affordable housing going forward into the next downturn, when we can no longer rely upon impact fees and in lieu fees paid by market rate developers. It's a time when the land prices get cheaper, construction gets cheaper. For affordable housing, that's the time when we can really make dollars go a lot farther. But what that also means is decoupling local funding from development. So whether that is through bond issuance or through other, much as you hate to say it, some other tax measure that continues to provide a dedicated funding source for affordable housing, that can help buttress the production of affordable housing and make it countercyclical. The great thing is that at the state level, there is, at least under the governor's proposed budget, there is more affordable housing funding becoming available than any time since the demise of the redevelopment agencies. So we are finally getting back to where we were before Governor Brown eliminated redevelopment agencies. That's great news, and that funding can continue because of a lot of the recent bond issuance. So can we provide that necessary local funding to match and invest during the next downturn?
Thank you. All good food for thought. I think that's going to trigger maybe a series of other questions. At this point, we'll open it up to Q&A. We've got a microphone floating around. I will let Amy control the microphone, but first I just want to, I know that housing often elicits a lot of perspectives on many sizes or range. I do want to encourage anyone who wants to ask a question, but please ask a question and hold your comments to a minimum. If you have more than one question, ask your question first, and then we'll come back around to you, so long as we give people a chance. And always just please be respectful. I want to just encourage people to kind of focus on ideas and policies. We don't need to react to individuals, groups, or whomever. Let's just try to stick to the